Hello and welcome to the 6th video that I'll be posting on my Java tutorial series. And in today's video, we are going to talk about arrays. But before we start programming, you might be wondering, what is an array? Well, an array is a data type that can store many elements, and these elements can be accessed through the indexes which are provided with the arrays. And in programming, there are many types of arrays, starting from the one-dimensional array and up until 2 or even 3-dimensional arrays. And in most cases, you are going to face with 1-dimensional array or 2-dimensional array. 3-dimensional arrays are rare, and you might not even get to experience 4 or 5-dimensional arrays because they are really that rare. And with that said, in today's video, I will be focusing more on the 1-dimensional array to ensure that the basics are all covered and you guys are able to do the basics. With that said, let us open our Visual Studio Code. And just like always, click on the new file, and we're going to name this array 1dimension.java. And this is using this name because there are, as I said before, there are many types of arrays, and in today's video, we're going to focus on 1 dimension only. So it's best to specify the array. So anyway, back to the programming. And as always, we need to type in our public static void main string args. And as you might know, this is for running the code. And the first thing that I'm going to teach you in this video is how to create an array, and this is done by using this format right here. So I'm just gonna multi-line comment this, and I'm gonna show you how to create an array. So how array creation. To create an array, we need to type in this format, data type, and we have the square brackets, name of array is equal to new data type, and inside of that bracket or square brackets there's going to be length of array. And in this case, or for this video, of course, I am going to create a integer array that has a length of 10, so that means that it can store 10 data. So in line 7, I'm going to write int because that will be the data type that I'll be using, and then we have these square brackets, and then we're going to name the array, and then I'm going to equal this to the new, and then the data type, and the data type has to be the same with the first data type, meaning that we will write new int, and then we have the square brackets, and then the length of array, and I chose to do 10, but you can do whatever value you want. But for this video specifically, I'm going to use 10 because 10 is a good number. Okay, and that is how we create or make an array. Now, once we create an array, we need to preset certain values, because from the definition of an array, which is a data structure that can store many elements, these elements can be accessed through the indexes, which means that to essentially predefine values inside of an array, we need to use the index. And the way we can do this is by following, yet again, another format. And I'm going to write it down here, predefine values. And the way we can predefine values is by simply referring to the name of the array, and then we add the index inside the square brackets, and we equal that to the value that we want to store. And I'm going to, of course, try to predefine the values inside of our array. So I'm going to start off by predefining the array index 0 to have the value 100, and then array index 1, which is 101. And this process is quite repetitive, so I will see you soon. Okay, so once we've done that, we already preset the values inside of the arrays. And now, since we already predefined the values, we also need to know how to access certain array values. We can't just directly access all of them at the same time. And the way we do this is by yet again using a format, which I'm going to write down. Access certain values. And the way we do that is by simply referring to the name of array and once again refer to the index. And that is all. So in the example below, in line 28, for instance, I want to print out 103. I just simply need to type in system.out.println array, and then we type in the index of the array that we want. And since 103 index is 3, so I just need to type in array 3 and then put semicolon and click on run, and we printed out 103. And if I were to change the index to 9, for instance, of course, we can see that it prints out 109. And that just goes to show how we can access certain values inside of the array. Okay. And based on my previous explanation, I've also drawn a Jamboard to actually help visualize this. So if we look at our Jamboard right now, we can see that, for example, of course, this will be our array. So for instance, we need to imagine this as our array here. Give me a second, let me just type it down, array. So imagine that this right here is the array right here. The length of the array here plays a role, which is the ability to tell us how many data we are going to store. And I'll get to that and discuss further about that. Anyway, we have to see how we predefine the values. And as you can see here, in array index 0, we preset 100. So array 0, 100. And then array 1 is 101. And this process is quite repetitive until array 9, 109. As you can see, the compiler simply looks at the name of the array and then looks at the index and presets the value. And this also applies for accessing certain values, where it looks at the compiler and just takes the index and then takes the value inside of that index. So in the example right here, we printed out array 9. So that means that it looks at the array and then looks at the index 9 and prints out this value right there, which is why we were able to get 109. Okay, and the unique thing that I need to point out from this right here is the fact that the arrays start with 0 and not 1 as its first index, and this actually will come in handy when we start programming and make use of the array logic. But for now, you need to remember that the array starts from 0 and never 1. And then another unique thing is, as you can see here, there's a total of 9 index, or the maximum index is 9, but the length is 10. And a way I can help you visualize this is to imagine the length as the number of data. So just remember that when we want to create a array, we have to remember how many data do we want to store, and that will be the length. And from there, we also need to know or remember that the last index will be one less than the length. So if we have the length 11, then the last index will be 10, and that's because we start from 0 and not 1. So we start from 0, which causes us to get the last index 1 less than the length. Okay? I hope that cleared things up, and I also need to teach you regarding a keyword that's often used in arrays, which is the length keyword. And whenever we use the length keyword, we use it in a way so that we can know how many data we are dealing with. And the way we can do that is by typing in system.out.println, which is used for printing, taking the name of the array, and dot length. We have the semicolon, and when we print right here, we get 10. And this just goes to show the length of the set array. So remember that the length will always be the number of data. And to avoid confusion, I'm going to put this code right here back to the commented line or commented section to ensure that there's no confusion. Length is equal to number of data. Okay, now I've discussed about the length keyword, how to access, how to predefine, and how to create. I can discuss on how to present or print the whole array. And there is actually two methods, and that includes the normal method and the Java library. And in my opinion, it's much better to use the normal method because the normal method can actually allow you to manipulate the data and it can really help your logic. But of course, by doing, the normal method allows you to manipulate, but it's much more harder to write. Despite the normal method being able to manipulate and easily modify the values, you need to also remember that the normal method also has its disadvantages, which is, the need to write much more lines of code, and it also takes much more time when compared to the built-in Java library. And the built-in Java library itself also has its advantages, which is much more shorter in code, but it doesn't allow you to manipulate anything because it runs through the library first. And in my opinion, it's much better to use the normal method whenever we want to manipulate data. But when you just want to print out the array and look at the array as it is, you can use the built-in library. Okay, so anyway, we are going back to our programming, and I'm going to teach you how to print the whole array using the normal method. And the way we can do that is by using a for loop here. So we're going to type in for integer I, because in a for loop we need to make a variable, and I will always be less than array.length. And remember that array.length tells us the number of data, and then add semicolon at the end. And here we need to type in system.out.println array I. And then by doing this, when we click on run, we can get the data. We can get all the data right here. And the way we can do this is simply by making use of array and indexes. And as you can see here in line 38, the array.length will always be equal to 10, and the I will at the beginning start from 0. And then in line 39, we can see that it prints out array index 0, which is I in the first place. And then since 0 is less than 10, the statement is true, and we get array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it prints out 109. And the next operation will break the loop because 10, which is I, is never less than 10 itself, which is why we don't print out array 10. And if, for instance, of course, since we only have, the number of data to be 10, and we're referring to array 10 or array with index 10, we know that it is exceeding the set array. There will be an error that will pop up. And the fact that there is no error here shows that the program is working perfectly and it's able to print out everything. Anyway, this is the normal method. Now I'm going to multi-line comment this to ensure that there is no confusion. Normal method. Okay, now I am going to teach you the library version. And since we are dealing with libraries, we need to do the import. So go to the first line and type in import java.util.asterisk. And you might be wondering, what is the asterisk for? Well, remember back in the if statement video where I used the dot scanner here for importing the scanner? Instead of directly importing each and every class, we can just directly type in java.util.asterisk, which will directly import all of the classes, and it already involves, importing the scanner, importing the arrays, and etc. etc. So just use the asterisk, which will directly import everything. Anyway, back to the programming. We're going to go back to line 48 and we're going to type in system.out.println, and then we're going to type in arrays because we are dealing with arrays. So arrays dot toString, and then we refer to our object, and our object that we want to print is the array. So array, and then put the semicolon, click on run, and you can see here that the library printed out in a way so that it's much easier for us to see because it has these brackets right here. And yeah, the main difference between this and the normal method is, you can see the normal method is manual, and we can actually put something in between this loop or for loop here, which allows us to manipulate the data. But in the library method, we don't actually get to do anything inside of it, which means that there can be no manipulations made. And this is referring back to what I said before, where I'm going to use, or usually use, the library to just print out the data and see what happens after the manipulation. But the manipulation itself is done through the normal method. And yeah, I hope that cleared things up. And let me just comment this again to help avoid confusion. Library method. And I'm just going to move this to here. And I am also going to teach you right now how to manipulate the array, or we can also say manipulation in array manipulation. And I'm not gonna really teach you something as advanced because there's already a lot of things that you need to take in. So I'm just going to do basic manipulation or array manipulation, which involves, of course, our searching and returning index, and the second, which is replacing or overriding. Replace or override values. Okay, so for searching, I am going to type the code right here below in line 59. It's going to make use of the for loop again. For in I equals 0, I is less than array.length and I plus plus, which means that we are able to check each and every index, and then we can simply just type in a if statement inside. So if array with index I is equal to, for instance, a value which can be 103, for instance, 103, then we can simply system.out.println I. Or we can store this value inside of a variable like integer index found, like that. But for now, let me just print this out so you can see what is happening. As you can see, it prints out number 3 because the index of 103 is 3. So yeah, this is still pretty basic logic, and it makes use of the index. If it's equal to the value that we set, then we have to print it out. Or we can always, preset the index found to the value of the I, and simply just system.out.println the index found. And it is error because we do not initialize it. And in most cases, I just normally put -1 here, because if there is no value that's same with 103, we are going to get the index found with -1, which shows, or in most cases tells us, that there is no value. And it's a good practice to do so, because when we are dealing with array searching, if there is a value that we don't have, we can just represent it with -1, and then we can simply say in the if statement saying that if it's -1, then we can say there is no value, like that. And it usually is good practice to always preset it to -1 and override it to a value or an index found inside the array. And yeah, that is searching. And I also want to try and challenge you to create a method for this, but I'll probably discuss this further on and later on. Okay, and then the second thing that I want to teach you in array manipulation is none other than replacing or overriding, right? And to actually do this, we simply make use of the same code, which is for int I equals 0, I is always less than array.length, and then I++, and we can use the curly brackets, and then we are just going to use the same if statement right here. If array index, let's say array index I is equals to, let's say 104, then we can essentially preset the value to array I is equals to 140, for instance, and then this will override and replace the value with 140. So the value 104 will be replaced by 140. And then to show this, I will directly just type in system.out.println arrays toString and array. And this is the use of the library. Meanwhile, this is the normal method. As you can see, it just makes it much more easier to understand that the value is replaced by 104 to 140, and it just really helps us to understand what's happening in a much more easier way, rather than using the normal method. But the normal method is used to manipulate the data. And I think that's an easy way to actually visualize to you what is much better to use, or when to use the library and when to use the normal method. And I would also like to challenge you to try to make a method for the replacing as well. And this time we make a normal method instead of a return method, because we simply just want to return nothing. We just want to override something, right? So that's why we do not make use of the return method, but rather the normal method. So pause the video right now and try to make these two algorithms into methods. Okay, so to actually do the searching, I am going to make a method called static void searching. And it's much better or common practice to capitalize the first letter, searching. And then I'm going to take in two parameters, because we want to make sure that the code is, being able to easily be reusable. So I'm just going to name this searching, and then we need to take in the array, specifically the integer array. So I'm going to name this array, and then we're going to need another parameter, which is the value. So integer value. And since we want to return something, instead we replace the void here with the return value, and the return value will be an integer because we will return a index. So that's how we do it, and then we simply need to type in return index found, and index found is equals to -1. The index found itself will be an integer, and we simply need to return index found. And then the only main difference between this code and this code right here is the fact that we just need to copy this right here and paste it right here, and all of it is the same thing. The only main difference is instead of changing 103, we just need to equal that to our value because we want to make it reusable in many cases. So if I were to, for example, remove this right here, so I'm gonna multi-line comment this, multi-line comment that, and then below I will use the, oh wait, this is also an error because it's part of the code, so I'm just gonna combine them into one comment, and then in line 71 try to make use of this method right here. So it'll be searching array, and the value in itself will be 103. And since it returns a value, remember in the previous video that since it returns a value, we can store it inside of a variable or directly print it out because it has a value. So I'm just going to print it out directly to simplify things, and click on run, and we get the same value here, 3. So that goes to show that we've successfully transformed this code right here into a method. So with that in mind, for those of you who haven't done replacing, you can try to pause the video right now and also try to implement the concept as well. So pause the video right now and I'll give you time to do replacing again. Okay, so for those of you who did successfully did it, nice. But for those of you who don't know how to do it, it's fine. It's part of the learning process. And as I said before, since this does not return any value, we simply don't need to create a return method, but rather just a normal method. So I'm going to type in static void replace, and then take in the array again. And remember, the reason why we're taking a parameter for the array is because the array itself cannot be accessed inside of this method. And the only way we can access it or refer to an array is by making a parameter. So whenever you are dealing with other data from any other source of code, just directly use the array right here. Or make a parameter for it. And an example is our array right here. Anyway, this is the same thing with replace, so int array, and then we are going to take in the integer value and use the curly brackets to indicate the region of the method, and then more or less copy this right here, and then the only main difference here is when it equals to the value, you can also preset a new value. So in 140, we just need to set up a new value. And this time, since we are dealing with the void, we do not return anything. So yeah, we just directly type in that. And to showcase this, I'm going to comment this once again. And then just type in or make use of the new program or method, and that will be replace. It takes in the array, and the value will be the 104, and the new value will be 140. Click on run right here, and we should get the same value. And as you can see here, it's much more effective to just directly write this code right here than writing this code multiple times. And that just goes to show how we can create methods that essentially be able to copy the algorithm and help simplify the use of it or use of the code. As you can see, I can directly already organize everything I need, which is the array which we are dealing with, and then we can directly take in the value that we want to change, and then we can just put in the new value, and it's already there, and it's easier to use than just this, right? So that's another benefit of using methods. And I also need to point out, and I don't know if I really need to point this out, but as you can see here, whenever we make a parameter of an array, we need to type in the data type and the brackets and then the name of the array. And the name of array is in this case the same. But if, for instance, of course, you chose a different name like array2, and then we are going to deal with all the code, you need to refer to array2 instead of array, because this is the variable that will store the data that's passed down inside of this method whenever we're called. So in other words, of course, it's just coincidence that I use the name array and the name is array as well. If the replace here or replace method here, the integer array here is not called array like array2, because just now my integer array is array2, and this is the example right here. You just need to click on it and just type in the name of the array, and this is pretty self-explanatory as I've already discussed inside of the methods video, but I would just like to clarify that. And yeah, I think that's it for today's video. Actually, I think that sums up the array video, and all the topics are already covered, so let us revise one more time regarding this topic. So yeah, we have the array creation, which start off with our data type, brackets, name of the array, and then the length, and the length is the number of data types. It's how you preset by just calling the name, index, value. And when we want to access certain values, we just need to type in the name of the array and the index that is found inside the name of the array. And then we have the length keyword, which is used to essentially access or be able to refer to the number of data found inside the array. And then we have the printing out, which involves the normal method, and the library method, where the normal method causes or allows us to be able to modify and access it. Meanwhile, the library method is just used for printing out in this format, where we don't actually get to manipulate anything, but we are able to get a good view on it. And the only way we can actually use the library method is to import the java.util. Meanwhile, the normal method does not need any library to function. The library method requires it to function. Then we have array manipulation, and it's not really that deep yet, which is searching and returning index, which can be done by directly, using this for loop here, where we take in the first index, which is 0, and then we need to make sure that the I is always less than length or the number of data types, and it will slowly check each and every value. And then the second one is the replacing, which just does the same thing, but the different thing is we preset or override the set value with a newer value instead of directly just storing the I value or the index. And that is the way we do replacing and searching, and this is the method, which essentially follows the same algorithm but just makes it reusable because we have parameters which are being put inside of the method. For now, I think that sums up today's video. I hope you understand further about arrays, and I'll be discussing 2D arrays in the next video, and I hope that you understand further about Java and continue on your Java programming journey. And that's it for me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.